WNST, Towson, Baltimore, the beach, or for the ball game, or to the lacrosse game, or over the river and through the woods. Hope everybody has a safe little holiday and grilling out this weekend. I've got a little breezy chat here. This was a great week for me to try to have some people on that, quite frankly, I've always wanted to have on. I'm one of this dude's biggest fans out there, from an old media critic. We used to all be media critics at one point. I still feel like I'm a media critic. He does that for SI and Sports Illustrated and SI.com. He also podcasts, teaches, writes, reports on ethics, and shares amazing stories of journalism that I appreciate the most. He is Richard Deitch from Sports Illustrated, joining us from New York. What's going on, man? How's life up there, huh?
That's good. It's quite a hype job you just gave me, Nestor. I appreciate that. Life is always busy and crowded up here in New York, but like I'm sure in Baltimore, we are happy to be getting better weather now as it gets closer to June, July, August.
You know, it's funny to hear a media critic say to me, hype job, because, like, I was Nasty Nestor. I don't know if you know that. You know, I mean,
I do. Yep.
You know, I call it the way I see it, and, you know, I really do enjoy your work, and I enjoy the greater thought going into journalism these days and what I do for a living and what writers do for a living, and certainly politically what needs to be done in our society. And you are, much like me, I guess, beginning to become a get-off-my-lawn kind of guy in a world of Skip Baylesses where we're trying to peddle intelligent information and the difference between news, fake news, sensationalism, and who would be an authority on reporting about sports with some integrity and the kind of depth and information that I always wanted as a kid who wanted to do this as a reporter, you know?
Well, a couple things there. You know, interestingly enough, I don't like the word critic. I have no problem if people call me that, and I consider myself a writer and a reporter who covers sports media in addition to other stuff I cover, SI, women's basketball, tennis, the Olympics. So that's sort of how I've always tried to approach sports media. So there's no doubt I give opinion, but I've really tried to base that in reporting and reported analysis and some kind of, however you want to sort of phrase it, but sort of some kind of journalistic thought.
An educated opinion, an opinion of someone that has spent their life researching this. I mean, this is all I've ever done. So it really is sort of a pop shot when somebody says, I know more than you know about this or that, when they are, quite frankly, someone in their basement, as we like to make fun of, or trolls, or whatever the modern day thing. Look, I took phone calls for 22 years, and I don't do it anymore because there are people who care to know a lot, and there are those who just care to wager on it or buy a bobblehead or get an autograph. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons people love sports these days, you know?
Well, I'd say this. I'm not one to be sort of pejorative in terms of anybody who's calling a sports talk show or anybody who's dropping comments in a story on the web, obviously, unless it gets into racism and sexism. There's just no place for that kind of nonsense. But I think what frustrates me more, and you sort of hit on this a little bit, are those who really, and there's a gigantic industry for this now, basically those out there who fall under the rubric of sports media who will say anything essentially to get some kind of viewership, some kind of virality when it comes to the web, and not having any kind of basis in any kind of reporting, particularly firsthand reporting. And then you get to the really easiest kind of stuff, which is just basically attacking athletes, coaches, and teams, essentially for sport and essentially for ratings. There's no doubt that, we get criticized. The LeBron Jameses, and Andrew Lucks of the world, they're in the spotlight. They deserve criticism. But when people are criticizing them merely for the sake of trying to get some run out of that criticism, that's where it becomes a little bit frustrating. You wish that there were executives at the FS1s and the ESPN who would try to aspire to something a little bit higher.
Well, then we've had like the Seattle Times incident this week where it's player versus media association. I've been in those locker rooms where, athletes or coaches use the pulpit to intimidate. Dude, I'm the guy that had my press pass taken away after 21 years because the owner wanted to intimidate me, So, I've been on the other end of that. And, I think from an authenticity standpoint, and if you're a columnist at a newspaper, whatever that that new wave of a columnist would be, there is a substantial amount of education and background and fleshing out that I want to have in anybody that I read. I want to read the work of an expert. And I know that much like critic, right, expert is one of those words we can attach to anything, but I really do like having experts on my show now and trying to talk to people that know more than know less. And I think I'm doing my audience a service that when they get in the car and put my radio station on, whatever's coming out of it is at least factual, educated, that the two people actually speaking to each other have put a little bit of effort into this and a little bit of research into this, and that what we're putting out it becomes better because of that. I don't know that I see that a lot anymore, or that is even what networks are looking for, quite frankly, right?
Well, I'd say certainly ESPN still has a lot of that. I mean, they're even with their layoffs, which were awful, there's no doubt that they have a commitment to journalism. And you look around the ranks, and there are an immeasurable amount of talented journalists who work there. Problem is, of course, that there are not as many today as there were a month ago. And in certainly some other, if you want to just sort of talk about linear television, I mean, FS1 essentially has abandoned it. NBC certainly has some, but it's less sort of the traditional journalism and more, I think, respected observers like Acostas or Al Michaels, et cetera. Fox Television, again, they do a good job on production, but and they have some people who are traditional reporters, Ken Rosenthal, Baltimore guy, Tom Verducci, et cetera. But again, that's not really the business that they're in. What's interesting to me is that, one, newspapers, I think, in my opinion, and, sort of digital platforms still have the best in terms of sports, credible people, reporters who are actually in the locker room on a daily basis, doing really good work. But where it seems to be more apparent, at least today, and maybe this is sort of part of the political cycle, is that the public, I think, has, in the era of Donald Trump, headed back to traditional, old-school mainstream media places like the Washington Post and the New York Times to follow and pay for, and that's the important part, pay for quality news. So will sports follow? I don't know. But
well, then the team websites have gotten involved too, though, right?
Well, it is a little bit heartening, at least in terms of the political sphere and the news sphere. There is a pushback to quality, at least in terms of those two publications.
I would say in a place like Baltimore, and this is the little bubble I'm in, but this is a major league team, right? Worth $2 billion and a network worth $1 billion that was birthed from nothing, that is in dispute in the New York Supreme Court, that is not being reported on at all in our marketplace. I mean, Eric Fisher's reporting on it at SBJ and a few other places. The Post hasn't taken nearly as much interest in it as I thought they would, given that it's $400 million, and that'll roughly be what Bryce Harper or Manny Machado wind up getting a year and a half from now. But, in Baltimore, the pond is small, right? I mean, Masson has no news department at all. Nothing. They run ESPN News all night. They're owned by Peter. The team website, Orioles.com, MLB.com, the MLB Network, it's all under the same umbrella of that's not journalism, that's insider PR, that's corporate communications, and 90% of what an Oriole fan takes in for information, maybe more than that, is brought on by organizations completely owned or operated in a very Trumpian fashion to the media. So I don't know if that's going on everywhere. Certainly the Red Sox get their fair share of criticism and other more mainstream franchises, but we're moving toward that where the teams are their own newspaper and fans sort of accept that there will never be any criticism of the center fielder.
Well, I would say this. I can't speak to the Baltimore market because I don't live there. I can't speak a little to the Boston market because I have relatives there, and I'm there quite a bit. And even with team-owned sources, the Boston Globe, owned by John Henry and his group, is still a pretty independent group. There's still a lot of criticism of the Sox when criticism is warranted. The radio market up there is, I would say, almost too critical, in fact, of local teams. So I think, at least in Boston, it's not just all RedSox.com. It's not just, whether it's sort of Comcast or Nesson. Well, not really Comcast, but Nesson sort of waving the Red Sox banner. So I would say that, and I would imagine this would be the case in Baltimore, where the Sun still covers the Orioles. you have to go and actively search out now as a reader, viewer, listener, quality sources. The days of this being 1965 and your family subscribes to a paper and all this is coming to you. You now have to go out and I think be a really smart and educated consumer and try to find where the best sources are. At the same time, and I think, Nestor, you know this, there's a lot of fans who don't want negative stuff. They want essentially fan-like publications, and there's always going to be a market for that. That's not a criticism of that. It's just you should always know as sort of a consumer that kind of product is always going to be done to put the organization in the best possible light. And that's what PR is, as compared to what, in theory, journalism should be, which is as close as one can get to an accurate assessment of the situation.
The truth, even if it's a little uncomfortable, right?
Well, of course, yeah. I mean, the thing is, journalism is not a comfortable profession, or nor should it be, especially if you're sort of doing it correctly. And that's why there is always going to be conflict between reporters and organizations and players. As a general rule, 80-85% of sports coverage is probably positive if you just sort of made an honest assessment of it, like down the middle. But that 15% can be tough. And that's why, obviously, and this is sort of an old newsroom axiom, that if you are critical of somebody in the organization, you got to show up the next day. So they see you and you see them, and if nothing else, you can have a professional environment, even if they dislike what you say. But we're living in a very fragmented sports media world. We're living in a world where people are being laid off left and right, and there are going to be, as you mentioned, sort of more of these team-owned sources heading forward and less of the independent sources. You hope the independent source never goes away, but there's probably more, if you sort of want to put it in quotes, PR-oriented news for sports teams today than there has ever been at any time in our life.
And isn't that fake news unto itself? PR news, I mean, it can be fake news, but more than that, it's here's the truth, wink, wink, you have to believe us, right? That's sort of how it's stated, right? I mean, this is the unquestioned truth.
I wouldn't call it fake news. I would call it advocacy. And that's the dangerous word there. I mean, fake news is me saying that, Nestor, you married Selma Hayek.
Okay.
You did not do that, right? That's fake.
That's fake.
Where I could say is something to the effect of, Nestor, I've heard that Selma Hayek likes you, or, you're sort of contextually spinning it a little bit. That's where it sort of gets into this. That was really not a good example by me, by the way. That's where it gets into a gray area. But, fake news is sort of just literally sort of you can prove that it's not true. Where it gets into what a lot of the team sites do, I would say sort of it falls under like advocacy or pushing a positive message. That doesn't necessarily mean it's untrue. It's just you're not being given as a fan or consumer everything that exists other than this positive news.
Okay, well then there's, the Tom Brady reports on concussions, and then there's what went on with the Redskins back at the Combine. The teams routinely do put out fake news, right? I mean, especially on the injury reports, right? And when we start asking John Harbaugh about injuries, they don't want any news out. Not fake, not real, not anything. They want a moratorium, especially coaches on injuries in all the leagues, upper body injury, lower body injury. And that's really where the reporting comes into this thing. That's really where people try to play sleuth and Sherlock Holmes out what's really going on in a situation.
Yeah, again, and maybe we're just sort of arguing with semantics. I don't know if I'd call not putting down injuries fake news. I would just say that is that's an active intention not to put out news that exists. And yes, it then is up to the football reporters to get that information. For NFL, obviously, which half the time sort of acts like a combination of the KGB and CIA, that's not easy to get sort of in depth of what is going on. And that's ultimately why you need to have really good reporters who have really good sources within these places, who can cultivate players who really want the public to know honestly what's going out there. And if you want a sort of real life example of this, you wish that there was you wish there were there was more of this reporting in the 70s and 80s when it came to concussions and medical, because you look at the guys now who are in their 50s and 60s, the Tony Dorsetts or the Jim McMahons and stuff, and it's unconscionable, some of the medical stuff that was going on in the NFL, and we're now only reading about this in this decade. We didn't really read about that in the 70s and 80s, and I don't think those players were given their due diligence, because teams were probably actively trying to prevent the media from sort of finding out what was going on then. But that's still going to happen today in 2017. Ultimately, the goals of the Washington Redskins are and should be far different than the goals of the Washington Post and the Baltimore Sun.
He is Richard Deitsch. He does all things media for Sports Illustrated. You can follow him at SI.com as well as at Richard Deitsch. And hundreds of thousands follow him on Twitter for his insights and certainly his weekly column where, let me ask you this before I even get back to anything sports related. Like, who recommends your reading? Can I ask? Because, you're one of the great reading recommenders for people that want to sit around and Sunday read stories about whatever, war, life, cancer, sex, hope, drugs, rock and roll, whatever. You have a wide palette, but who's your reading recommender?
Well, basically, what I do is, Twitter is a really primary source for me, and I just follow a lot of who I think are really smart and good readers, and that's ultimately how I get my best recommendations.
So I got to go through your 579 people you're following and figure it out. That's good. Okay, that's
honestly,
good. Fair
that
enough.
would be the way to do it. There's a guy at the New Yorker named David Brand. He's a very, very well-known nonfiction writer. The guy basically never recommends a bad story. There's a woman who is a very famous Texas Monthly writer. She just moved to ProPublica, named Pamela Koloff. Again, somebody who will never recommend a bad story. I'm kind of a journalism nerd or a journalism junkie, and so I follow a lot of writers who work in different places across the country.
But I'm also a snob, dude. I think you are too. I don't want to read bad stuff, stupid stuff, comments at the bottom of a Twitter feed that are like a toilet. I only have so many hours in a day, bro. I'm right, sitting here doing this for a living, right? I want filet mignon here, dude. I don't want chuck steak, bro.
Yeah, like if I wanted to waste my time having guys give me a take as to why LeBron's not clutching the third quarter, you might as well put your head on a toilet. I don't need to do that. So you're right. You only have a finite amount of time, and if you're interested in quality, basically my advice is to, especially if you're on social media, just follow people who are really good at what they do in terms of providing content. So I love to read. That's always been the case for me, so I'm going to be reading a lot regardless. But the way I really sort of get and push good stories is I just happen to follow a lot of people who really are like me. They read a lot and they forward out like what's really good. And then obviously, of course, because I cover media, I have a lot of people who just will email me either things they've read or things that they've written. And that's another way that I can get a lot of stuff, because people know that every week, I sort of highlight stories that I really like.
Well, look, man, I'll be following along, and next time we get together, we'll talk about things like, money and all this stuff. But obviously the biggest story in your thing was ESPN and the cuts there, right? Like, that is, that's the glacial, global warming of sports media, is that thing has gotten fractured, and it's never going to be as big as it once was. And a lot of these operations are never going to be as big as they once were.
Yeah, I would not put any kind of epitaph yet for ESPN. They haven't died. The place still makes a ton of money. They're still the 8,000-pound gorilla compared to everyone else. Now, all that said, they are not what they were 5 years ago when they were in more than 100 million homes. They're now in, whatever it is, the moment, 85, 84 million. So they've lost a lot of money from cord cutting. And the rights fees that they paid for the NBA and the NFL and college football have sort of caught up to them. And that's one of the reasons why they had to lay off all those people. So they've had to scale down. They've essentially eliminated some sports, hockey specifically, where they used to pretty much try to cover everything. And they had a plan not too long ago where their goal was to basically beat every newspaper in every sort of major size city by having like these ESPN Bostons and, ESPN Chicago, et cetera. And they've blown that up as well. They could not beat the local. So they're a different organization. And they're a different organization, certainly content-wise, because SportsCenter the Sports Center we grew up with kids is essentially no longer. It's going to be far more of a personality-driven show. Scott Van Pelt and Jamel Hill and Michael Smith are examples of that. So if you like what they do, you'll watch. If you don't like what they do, you're not going to tune in because it's not the same old highlight show that it used to be. So
well, the same way you either watch Kimmel or you watch, Colbert.
Correct. Fallon or So it's a different organization, and it's going to be a different business heading forward. That said, they still come from a place of massive strength. They have a massive balance sheet, and they have really good technology heading forward. So ESPN's not going anywhere. They're not going away. They're just going to be a very different organization as we head forward than what we are used to be. But the thing that was always interesting with them is that was forever the safest place to work and a place that essentially only went one way when it came to revenue and profit. And that's no longer the case. They are not the same ATM they once were, even though they're a very profitable business.
Hey, dude, always appreciate your reporting. Keep it coming. We'll keep following. We'll keep reading. And a couple times a year, I'll try to bug you and bring you on, and you can make us all smarter around here, okay?
Thanks. Love Baltimore, man. Always happy to be here.
Well, I'll make sure you never eat a tourist crab cake or drink a warm beer here again. So next time you're coming through, let us know.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
You got it. Richard Deitsch joining us here from SI.com. You can follow him out at Sports Illustrated as well as at Richard Deitsch. That's DEITSCH. He is a great recommender of reading and a pretty good resource himself for sharing a bunch of good ideas and good thoughts out on Twitter. So go have him a follow. Go have us a follow. You can find us out in the Bayou Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from wherever you are. And I'll be West Coasting it this week. It's my wife's birthday, so we call that Memorial Day around here, but it is my wife's birthday weekend, so we're going to get out of here and hang out. You'll find me out on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Snapchat and Instagram and everywhere my mobile device goes as well. Don't forget, Dennis will be here on Thursday driving you home on the SSV on WNST. You can hear that from 3 until 5. And, of course, they sponsor our WNST tech service with breaking news. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard and the SSV. Alive and well each and every Thursday. He will drive you home. Last but never least, our morning newspaper delivers to your email inbox free of charge at 7 a.m. each and every morning. That's powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Get your news first in the morning. It's all brought to you by our friends at Planet of Triumphs.com and Planet Fitness. You can go to either one. Get yourself in shape this summer. I am Nestor. I am a very available individual. Nasty at WNST.net reaches me. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.